I had big dreams, and I've accomplished much more than I ever set out to accomplish, much more than I deserved.
For 81 years, Kenny Rogers had entertained the world with his soulful and thought-provoking music. Having made a mark in the entertainment world, Kenny never left without a final message. What could that be? Join us as we unravel the events in his final days, especially his last message to the world. The final words. Most of the time, emotions are best expressed through songs rather than just mere words. Such was the case of legendary country music singer Kenny Rogers. Having spent his 81 years on Earth writing songs and becoming a renowned artist, what other way could he best express himself than what he was already used to? Thus, he recorded his final message to the world through a song. In the days following Kenny Rogers' peaceful passing on March 20th, 2020, fans were met with a haunting, fitting tribute that felt like a final embrace. Certain records of Kenny were not released until after his death, and one of them was a ballad titled Goodbye, written by Lionel Richie, a longtime friend and collaborator. Just a week after Rogers' passing, Capital Nashville decided to share the track with the world, servicing it to country radio stations. There was no doubt that this was Kenny's way of saying goodbye. The song itself was not as remarkable as his final word, which came at the end of the video. It was a Bible verse from John 3, verse 16, a popular scripture that states the depth of God's love for humanity through the sacrifice of his Son, Jesus Christ. Kenny has been honest about his faith in God and has expressed it in his music over time. However, even at the point of death, he still made sure to let the world know that their belief in Jesus Christ is the only thing that guarantees their safety. Kenny's final message was not just warm, but a warning to the world that is still wallowing in the mud of sin. Kenny Rogers' early life. Kenneth Rogers was an American singer and songwriter. Born on 21st August 1938, Kenny met his country in the unfortunate state of the Great Depression, and Houston, with its shipyards, oil industry, and working-class neighborhoods, was a place where opportunity often came wrapped in struggle. Kenny was born in the San Felipe Courts, a public housing project in Houston's 4th Ward, one of the roughest and poorest sections of the city. His father, Edward Floyd Rogers, worked as a carpenter, while his mother, Lucille Lois Hester Rogers, was a nurse's assistant. The Rogers household was far from wealthy. Money was constantly tight. Edward was a hard-working man, but struggled with alcoholism. This battle cast a long shadow over Kenny's childhood. His mother, Lucille, on the other hand, was the emotional anchor of the family. She was practical, religious, and fiercely protective of her children. Being the 4th of 8 siblings, Kenny grew up surrounded by the love of his siblings. His eldest brother was Leland Rogers, a record producer who played a role in Kenny's early career. Barbara Rogers, his oldest sister, was the mother of the house when their mother was working long hours. Geraldine Rogers was the closest to Kenny in childhood. The siblings that came after him were Roy Rogers, Randy Rogers, Sandy Rogers, and Carol Rogers. They all have a special place in his heart. Growing up in a cramped government apartment, Kenny quickly learned to share space, clothes, food, and responsibilities at a very young age. The Rogers children were close-knit out of necessity, helping each other navigate the challenges of life in a low-income neighborhood. The San Felipe Courts were a place of poverty, crime, and worn-down buildings. On the other hand, it was full of community spirit, with neighbors looking out for one another. In later interviews, he recalled the smell of tar on the hot summer streets, the sound of train whistles in the distance, and the way mothers would shout from porches for their children to come in before dark. Kenny attended Wharton Elementary School before moving on to Washington Junior High School, which was later renamed George Washington Middle School. His high school was at Jefferson Davis High School in Houston. At school, he was never the top student academically, but he excelled in creativity and charm. His teachers noticed he had a natural gift for communication, often volunteering to speak in class or tell stories. But what set him apart was his entrepreneurial spirit. At just 11 years old, Kenny took his first job, selling newspapers to earn pocket change. Later, as a teenager, he worked as a shoe shiner, swept floors, and even took odd jobs at local grocery stores, earning $9 per week. These early hustles not only earned him a few dollars, but also instilled in him a deep appreciation for the value of money. Kenny's love of music began in his early teens. His sister Barbara had a record player, and the Rogers home was often filled with the sounds of country, R&B, and pop records. Kenny would sit for hours listening to the likes of Sam Cooke, Ray Charles, and Hank Williams. He was particularly fascinated by the way the singers told stories through song. While at Jefferson Davis High School, Kenny decided to try his hand at music. In 1954, at the age of 16, he bought his first guitar, a secondhand instrument, for $60. For Kenny, that was a huge investment at the time. He paid for it by working at the Houston Theater, where he tore tickets and cleaned up after shows. As his interest in music continued to grow, Kenny formed his first band, called The Scholars, while still in high school. They specialized in doo-wop and R&B, influenced by the hit records of the day. The group played at school dances, small clubs, and local events. While Kenny's voice wasn't yet the warm, husky tone the world later knew, he had charisma and stage presence. The Scholars even recorded a few local singles in Houston, though they didn't make a big splash nationally. Still, the experience gave Kenny his first taste of the recording process. Kenny graduated from Jefferson Davis High School in 1956. He was at a crossroads. College was not financially realistic, and the job market was competitive. Ultimately, his passion for music was undeniable. Around this time, his older brother Leland Rogers had started dabbling in the local Houston music scene as a promoter and producer. Leland encouraged Kenny to keep pursuing music, even if it meant balancing it with other jobs. Kenny took this advice and tried a few ordinary jobs before embarking on his professional career as a musician. One well-known early job he took was working as a warehouse laborer and a clerk, but nothing gave him the satisfaction that music did. The formative years of Kenny were marked by poverty, hard work, family support, and an unshakable determination that set the stage for everything he would later become. Though he hadn't yet become a household name, the foundation had been laid. Career journey. Kenny Rogers' professional story begins in the late 1950s when he started testing his voice against every genre within reach. He cut his first singles as a teenager and, hungry to learn, bounced through local groups before landing his first real apprenticeship, which involved playing upright bass and singing harmony in the Bobby Doyle Trio, an urbane jazz and pop outfit led by the blind pianist Bobby Doyle. Through the early 1960s, Rogers learned club discipline, crowd rapport, and cut sides with the trio that taught him arrangement and blend. By 1966, Rogers took a bigger swing and joined Christie Minstrels, then one of America's best-known folk ensembles. It wasn't glamorous. They embarked on numerous travels, wearing uniforms of smiles and singing endless choral parts, but not exactly what Kenny wanted. Kenny Rogers didn't crave a folk choir, but a band with a pulse and a point of view. After a year or so of that disciplined grind, he and several members peeled off to form something new. In 1967, Rogers and fellow defectors Mike Settle, Terry Williams, Thelma Camacho, and drummer Mickey Jones launched the first edition of their country rock band. There was no guarantee the pivot would work at first, but surprisingly, it did. The first edition, which happened in 1968, was a huge success. Their song Just Dropped In, a trippy fuzz guitar anthem, made a top 5 and became a pop hit. After that hit song came other songs that dominated the charts. Gradually, Kenny's smoky lead voice became famous. The first edition was so successful that they even had their syndicated TV variety show. Rollin' on the River, which was later named Rollin', aired from 1971 to 1973. Rogers' time on television was an important training for his future as a TV personality and easygoing host. But like many late 60s and early 70s bands, the first edition's momentum faded out as tastes shifted. By 1976, after nearly a decade of road miles and format juggling, the group was over. Rogers was finally free to try again, but this time alone. He came quietly as a solo artist in 1976 with the album Love Lifted Me, but it wasn't a massive success as he expected. He came back in 1977 with a self-titled album, Kenny Rogers, and that announced him as a new star. The breakthrough single from that album was Lucille, which hit #1 on the country chart, crossed over to pop radio worldwide, and won Rogers his first Grammy Award for Best Country Vocal Performance, Male. The lyric was a pure story about a man at a bar and a broken marriage, and Kenny sold it with conversational empathy. He was only 38 years old at the time, not a teen idol, and he sang like someone who'd lived through the messes his songs described. Storytelling happened to be his superpower in music. The single, Lucille, also won CMA Single of the Year in 1977 and repositioned Kenny as country's new crossover ambassador. The success of Lucille opened the door for other hits like Daytime Friends. Love or Something Like It, and, crucially, The Gambler. The Gambler reached #1 on the country charts and landed on multiple formats, earning Kenny a second Grammy. After that came more songs, sung through stories that affected many lives and made a mark in music. After spending a considerable amount of time in rock and pop, he pivoted back to country music in a distinct way. He collaborated with other country music stars and made duets. In 1987, he made Make No Mistake, She's Mine with Ronnie Milsap, a harmony-rich ballad that won the 1988 Grammy for Best Country Vocal Performance by a Duo or Group. In 2006, the Country Music Hall of Fame inducted him, formally enshrining the crossover king as a core architect of country pop's boom years. And he released the album You Can't Make Old Friends, whose title duet with Dolly Parton earned a Grammy nomination, reminding everyone that their rapport was as warm as ever. By 2005, Rogers was ready to write the last chapter of his life's song on his terms. He announced his farewell trek, The Gambler's Last Deal, a valedictory tour designed as both a celebration and a goodbye. The crown jewel arrived October 25, 2017, at Nashville's Bridgestone Arena. The All In for the Gambler All-Star Tribute featured the final on-stage performance with Dolly Parton. The two closed the night with easy laughter and a drop-the-mics moment that felt both theatrical and deeply personal, the kind of farewell most artists only dream of. At that time, he was already battling health challenges. Illness forced him to stop earlier than planned. In April 2018, on doctor's advice, Rogers canceled the remaining dates of his farewell tour, citing a series of health challenges. He shifted to family and rest, and the industry began treating his legacy as if it were still in the present tense, covering his songs, airing tributes, and rehearsing the inevitable goodbye. Kenny Rogers died on the 20th of March, 2020, at home in Georgia, of natural causes. Even after his passing, his music journey still continued. In June 2023, his estate and UME released Life is Like a Song, a posthumous collection of unreleased studio recordings from 2008 to 2011, including collaborations and a tender piece called Catchin' Grasshoppers that framed fatherhood as gently as any song he'd ever cut. It was a final handshake from the artist who had long since taken a seat in America's emotional living room. Outside of music, Kenny lived with an array of passions and misadventures. He found pleasure in outdoor games and took up a hobby in tennis at 35. He practiced 8 hours a day and climbed the ranks, even once exceeding Bjorn Borg in doubles ranking. Apart from tennis and climbing the ranks, his creative pursuits also extended to photography. He studied under one of Ansel Adams's assistants and published 2 photographic books in the 1980s. He also ventured into restaurant entrepreneurship, co-founding Kenny Rogers Roasters in 1991 with the former KFC CEO. Though the US locations closed by 2011, the brand thrived across Asia. That was not all. He dabbled in acting, starring in films like Six Pack and the Gambler TV series, hosting the A&E series The Real West, and hosting specials like The Christmas Record with Dolly Parton. He was a well-known TV personality and actor, even though his passion and records and music cannot be ignored. Kenny also had quirky personal touches. On his Georgia estate, he kept a goat named Smitty, whom he called his center, a source of calm amid his whirlwind years. Fans recall the joy of visiting his home, riding go-karts, and discovering simple pleasures. His home was peaceful and accommodating. Personal life.
I take the blame for it because I think it's a man's responsibility to protect that relationship, and I didn't do that.
His experiences and memories of love majorly inspire Kenny Rogers' love songs. His melodies stem from certain relationships that shaped him into the person he is. He married 5 times, each union revealing a chapter of himself that he had never known. His first marriage in 1958 was to Janice Gordon. She was his childhood sweetheart and had gotten pregnant with Kenny's child when he was just 19. Stuck in that youthful solitude and responsibility, he had to do the needful, even though he wasn't meant to step into that role. After their marriage, their daughter, Carol Lynn, arrived the same year. Though love was at the core, he couldn't keep to the promise of being a present father. Carol later revealed that Kenny was just her father in name, but not in deeds. She also thought that her stepfather offered her more stability than Kenny could at the time. The strain of being committed to his career took a toll on his marriage, and they drifted apart. Their estrangement remained a deep, private echo in Kenny's heart. He said in an interview, "I loved her. You can't say I'm afraid of commitment. I've been married 5 times." Thus, Kenny's marriage to Janice Gordon ended painfully. It wasn't long before he moved on to Gene Rogers in 1960. Their marriage lasted barely 3 years before the unfortunate plague of divorce hit them. There was no dramatic falling out. It's simply the quiet unraveling of 2 people drifting apart. He later confessed that boredom and emotional disconnection had played their part. Kenny Rogers' 3rd marriage was to Margot Anderson in 1964. One remarkable thing about this marriage was that it produced Kenny Jr., Kenny Rogers' first son. For a time, this seemed the connection he had sought, yet his career's rapid growth made his presence sporadic. He wrote in his memoir how being gone so much caused a disconnect. When the marriage ended in 1975, he regretted ever allowing it to happen. It's not because of the love he lost, but the time he couldn't reclaim. 2 years later, he met Marianne Gordon, an actress whose union with him would later offer him a sense of partnership he'd rarely known. They got married and welcomed their son Christopher Cody in 1981, and for a while, Kenny might at last find balance between career and home. But the demands of fame, of touring, of a life lived in motion weigh on him. The pattern of divorce continued, and in 1993, after 16 years of marriage, they ended it all. This time, the divorce came with so much financial and emotional cost. However, Kenny took personal responsibility for all. He had said, "Every woman I married, I really loved. I blame myself and my chosen field of music." He took a 4-year break to think and find balance between family and music. He was determined to make his relationship work this time, and when he met Wanda Miller in 1997, it was divinely arranged. Kenny was already 59 years old at that time, and Wanda was decades younger than him, yet he considered her his soulmate. Their connection cut through skepticism and age gaps. However, they got married and welcomed their twin sons, Justin and Jordan, in 2004 when Kenny was already 65 years old. He embraced this late chapter of fatherhood. He made it a point of duty to spend every Saturday with them, taking them to McDonald's for breakfasts, car washes, Chuck E. Cheese games, and many other fun sites. They call it Super Saturday. He slowed his career to prioritize them. When asked about why he had children at such an older age, Kenny said, "I didn't want her to wake up at 50 when I'm dead and for her to have to say, 'I wish I hadn't married Kenny. I could have had kids.'" That marriage gave Kenny the balance he needed, and he never needed to remarry again until the time of his passing. Despite the peace and balance he found in his marriage to Wanda, there were certain dirty things he did in the shadows. In the 1990s, Kenny became embroiled in a phone intimate scandal. He later said he thought it was the safest intimacy there was. The callers filed a lawsuit against him, and he settled them promptly with a huge amount of money, regretting that he'd considered those callers friends. Kenny's life was far from perfection as he admitted to trying substance use, including acid and pot. He once stepped on stage high, and his band had to urge him to step off. Another shocking revelation about Kenny's personal life was the plastic surgeries he had. In fact, he referred to himself as the plastic surgery king because he didn't just do it once or twice, but more than 4 times. The first plastic surgery was eyelid surgery, also known as blepharoplasty. Kenny openly acknowledged having this surgery in 2006. He explained that he sought to reduce wrinkles around his eyes, but was unhappy with the results. The area around his eyes became too tight for his liking. He told People magazine, "Last year I had so many lines coming in at the side of my eyes. So I went in and got my eyes done, and I'm not happy about it." Another surgery Kenny did was a facelift. Reports indicate he also had a facelift to firm up sagging skin, likely contributing to a smoother and tighter facial appearance. Observers have also noted that his eyebrows were positioned noticeably higher than is typical for a male with normal brow anatomy, suggesting a possible brow lift procedure. The raised brows contributed to a more startled or artificial expression. Some sources speculate he may have had a nose job, otherwise known as rhinoplasty, and possibly other treatments like Botox, although Rogers didn't confirm any of these. But how did Kenny feel about his surgeries? Not good. On Anderson Live, Kenny shared why he pursued cosmetic enhancements. He said he had the resources and time and wanted to look better, but admitted uncertainty about the outcome. Although he humorously referred to himself as the plastic surgery king, he also called his decision foolish. Reflecting on the eye surgery, he lamented that his eyes used to look warmer. Overall, he conveyed clear dissatisfaction, especially with the eye work, calling it something that drives him crazy. He documented all these regrets in a 2012 memoir titled Luck or Something Like It. He laid bare his regrets and revelations, saying, "There's a very fine line between being driven and being selfish. I think I crossed that line." Kenny finally took a little break at 2015 when he was 77 years old. He retired from touring, citing mobility issues and his desire to be present for his youngest son. "I didn't spend this time with them, and I regret it," he admitted. "I really need to spend some time with my boys. They're very important to me." The break doesn't stop him from performing in local clubs or recording songs, but he minimizes his activities because of how much his family means to him. Kenny Rogers, sickness and death. Kenny's health began to show signs of wear and tear in the late 70s. Years of constant travel and the natural wear of age had begun to take their toll on him. Subtle signs of slower steps, a leaner frame, and the quiet fatigue that even makeup and charisma couldn't hide were visible to both family and fans alike. In 2014, Rogers was diagnosed with skin cancer. The growth was removed successfully, and he spoke openly about the importance of checkups, brushing it off with his characteristic good humor. But while the skin cancer was treatable, other, more serious battles lay ahead. In 2017, while promoting the Gambler's Last Deal tour, Rogers received a diagnosis that would change the course of his life: bladder cancer. Despite receiving this heartbreaking news, Kenny continued performing for a while, unwilling to disappoint fans. However, the illness, combined with age-related complications, eventually forced him to cancel the remaining dates. His doctors made it clear that rest was no longer optional, but he needed it to survive. He took a bold step to officially announce that he's stepping away from the stage due to a series of health challenges. Privately, the decision was devastating, performing his identity. Yet, Rogers handled the moment with grace, assuring fans that the memories they had shared over the years meant more to him than anything else. By April 2018, Kenny was hospitalized again. This time, it was not for cancer, but for dehydration, a common yet dangerous condition for older adults. He was undergoing physical therapy to regain his strength, and in his own words, he planned on sticking around for years to come. Still, the hospitalization suggested underlying health issues. Fans began to notice that his public appearances were becoming rare, and when he did appear, he seemed more frail, his once broad frame noticeably diminished. What few knew at the time was that Rogers' medical challenges were not limited to bladder cancer. Reports later emerged that he had endured a 25-year struggle with hepatitis C, a condition that can quietly erode the liver over decades. This, combined with the effects of cancer treatment, contributed to liver disease and periods of intense back pain. In public, Rogers rarely spoke about his suffering, instead choosing to focus on his family, charity, and small pleasures, such as watching old westerns or tinkering in the garden. These health complications continued till the early 2020, when the world was just beginning to reckon with the spread of COVID-19. The news quietly emerged that Rogers' condition had worsened. The effect of the virus has probably worsened the cancer, the liver disease, and the years of strain. Surrounded by family, Rogers entered palliative care at his home in Sandy Springs, Georgia. Palliative or hospice care is often associated with surrender, but for Rogers, it was about finding peace. On 20th March 2020, Kenny Rogers slipped away in his sleep. He was 81 years old. The cause of death was listed as natural causes, a term that belied the long, complicated medical history behind it. News of his death spread quickly. Tributes poured in from every corner of the music world. Dolly Parton, his longtime friend and duet partner, recorded an emotional message, holding back tears as she said, "I loved Kenny with all my heart, and my heart's broken. A big old chunk of it is gone with him today." Fans flooded social media with their favorite memories, paying tributes to him, net worth, and legacy. By the time Kenny Rogers stepped away from the spotlight, his musical legacy had translated into significant financial success. At the time of his passing in March 2020, his net worth was estimated at around $250 million, fueled by decades of hit records, touring, acting, and entrepreneurial ventures. Rogers' wealth wasn't solely rooted in music royalties or ticket sales. He co-founded Kenny Rogers Roasters, a widely recognized restaurant chain in the 90s. He also maintained his record label, Dreamcatcher Entertainment, which allowed him creative control and a direct share in production profits. Kenny's savvy real estate moves added further heft to his portfolio. He owned luxurious estates across the country, from a multi-million-dollar Bel Air mansion reportedly valued at $65 million and sold for around $50 million to a Mediterranean-style home in the Atlanta suburbs. One iconic property was Beaver Dam Farms near Athens, Georgia, which spanned nearly 1,000 acres and featured guest houses, a golf course, a swimming pool, and recreational facilities, making it not only a personal haven, but also a lasting legacy of grandeur. Following his death, Kenny's estate, including his music catalog and assets, was primarily inherited by his wife, Wanda, and their twin sons, with provisions also made for his older children. His estate has since continued to serve his legacy through merchandise, royalties, and philanthropic efforts. Kenny Rogers had lived fully. He had sold more than 100 million records, won 3 Grammys, and left behind a catalog that spanned genres such as country, pop, rock, and even gospel. But in his final years, the trophies and fame were secondary. What mattered most to him was family. Even in illness, Rogers' generosity never faded. He had been deeply involved in charity work throughout his career, from raising money for disaster relief to supporting children's hospitals. In his will, he made provisions to ensure that some of these causes would continue to receive funding after his passing. What have you learned from the life of Kenny Rogers? Share with us in the comments and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the like button and check out the video displayed on your screen.